So hello everyone, my name is Andrew Jack from the Financial Times, and it's a great pleasure to welcome everyone to our third in this exceptional webinar series on COVID and the future of business education. And after a couple of previous sessions on particular topics, we're wrapping up with this great session with leaders from some key business schools to talk about the future of the MBA. So we're going to discuss a little bit initially with our four panelists about how we got to where we are, how things are evolving, and what really the challenges, the surprises, the trends will look like in business education in this new post-COVID or during COVID era in the future. We're going to go for about an hour, and as a reminder also this webinar will be available to watch afterwards as well. We'll share the details with you. We're keen to make this as interactive as possible, so please use not the chat but the Q&A function as soon as you're ready to raise your own questions, share experiences and respond to our panelists. But first of all, let me go around the room a little bit and talk a little bit about how we got to where we are now, really, what the last few months have been like adapting since COVID began to have an impact on higher education as well as so much else of society. So what were the key pain points and adjustments that each of you had to make in the short term as you coped with the final semester or so, or for some cases, depending on the time zone, a different part of the academic year, but to adjust in short notice to lockdowns, to changes in student and faculty behaviours, and to demands indeed for content. Maybe Anne Harrison from Berkeley Haas, I could start with you. How has it been in the last few months? What have been the key experiences you faced? Anne, are you on mute?
Yes, that's a great question. Hi, I'm Anne Harrison. I'm the Dean at Berkeley Haas. The primary challenge for us was we had 48 hours to go from an entirely face-to-face program. All 6-degree programs were face-to-face. In 48 hours, we went entirely remote. And that was really the biggest transformation and the fastest transformation that we've ever done. And I'm just so pleased to say we were very successful at it. We transitioned to Zoom in the short run, and the semester went very well. All the faculty cooperated and did their best in a difficult environment.
And any particular surprises? So there was obviously the technological transition. Anything else in terms of the things you really had to adapt very rapidly?
You know, honestly, the biggest surprise is we've been talking at Haas about having a remote program or an online option for our evening weekend program, probably for almost half a decade. And there were all sorts of concerns about it. The biggest surprise to me was how easy the transition was. It was instantaneous. And the student evaluations came back and they learned a lot, and we did well. I'm just amazed at how easy it was.
So let's switch time zones to London, the London Business School. Francois, tell us, what about for you? What were the biggest changes you had to put into place and the biggest surprises in the short term over the spring period?
So we were already asking ourselves, what's the best way to leverage technology to complement face-to-face? And the faculty had done a number of experiments, and we were innovating and learning. And then I think, like Anne said, so we had a bit of a staggered move because we have a campus in Dubai. That one locked down before the one in London, but it was 48 hours in each place. And what happened is really that exploration we were having just became the norm, everything online, like everyone else. The biggest surprise, I guess, it comes maybe from the fact that the first type of product that were developed online were those MOOCs, where really the one thing that we all noticed with MOOCs is how you could engage hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And so online became associated with so many people together on the platform. And what we learned is online can be fantastic for high intensity, high touch learning experiences. And that is why I think maybe Annie is pointing to the fact that in the end, the students had a great experience is because the way the faculty leveraged the technology ended up providing really high quality experience to the students. And plus then the faculty and students leverage the technology to make more of it than they could have without the technology. So for example, our student events broke attendance records. They had the best ever speaker lineup for students event and for classes. And then they found their own ways, the students with us, to complement that whenever they could with some other activities that were permitted under lockdown. So I think overall a fast transformation that was a longer line we were pursuing. We would have never gone so far. But in the end, a big lesson, which is through online, you can deliver really premium learning experiences.
So Eva Maciejewski from St. Gallen, what about for you? What were the biggest surprises and transitions you had to make?
So very much like Anne, we had to transport an entire portfolio of courses to online format within 48 hours. And again, as Anne said, it was actually remarkably easy. So, you know, we went through the steps of, do we have the technology? Is our faculty on board? How do we need to adjust the courses? Off we go. And the results were surprising. So we received rather high course evaluations, actually completely in line with the previous year. So that just showed us, okay, in terms of learning and teaching, we hit the KPIs. In terms of experience, of course, it is a different experience, and this is something that students do talk about. So it was remarkably easy, and I think that the key lesson is change is possible. And as they say, you know, never let a crisis go to waste. I think this is really something that we can learn from and should learn from and start to think big, because I think what we're very, very good at in business education is thinking in incremental steps. But I think a situation like that really asks us to think big towards the future. So what do we want to do in 5 years' time? What do we want to look like in 10 years' time? We need to start to think big. That's my lesson.
And we'll certainly talk about some of those forward-looking things in a minute. But let me turn to Jeff first initially. And obviously, Jeff, Garrett, you've transitioned recently from Wharton now to the Marshall School at USC. Maybe you want to kind of give a little bit of a compare and contrast of those two pillars of US business education, and if there are any differences between the two, as well as from other institutions you've been in contact with.
Yeah, I think, Andrew, that what you've heard so far is consistent with my dual experiences at Wharton and USC Marshall, which is that things went much better than we might have anticipated. So, I think there's the bottom line story for me is that the crisis is probably going to accentuate trends that were already there. So for schools that were already thinking hard about online, I think the opportunities are great. It meant the transition could be more seamless in the short term, but I think taking very seriously what a hybridized education might look like going forward is really important. But just in terms of a couple of specifics about things we learned about online that you can't do face-to-face. So the first one is no capacity constraint. And I think you and other media companies covered the fact that at Wharton we launched a class on the pandemics, and it was the largest class ever in the history of the Wharton School. We enrolled 2,500 students. We couldn't enroll 2,500 students on campus because we didn't have an auditorium that could seat 2,500 people. So the capacity constraints went away. It also allowed us to get executives who normally it might have taken 3 months to organize a 2-hour visit, and you get a Zoom call in an hour with them. I remember talking with Alex Gorski, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, who's got to be one of the busiest people in the world. We could get 45 minutes of Alex from his home, just in essence on the spot. But then the micro has been maybe surprising to me, just how well small group experiences can be curated online. Zoom is a many splendid thing, but the chat rooms and breakout rooms are clearly something that faculty and students have come to enjoy. So yes, we were, the trends were trends that were already there. They're just now happening in real time. But I think we've opened up opportunities that maybe we didn't see, or we certainly didn't think about 4 months ago.
So let's now throw it forward. So you've all had this, 3-month or so period of transition at rather an accelerated pace. Now you're all gearing up for the coming academic year. How different is the proposition that you're now putting in place from these short-term solutions? What are the kind of the newer, at least medium-term sorts of offerings and modifications compared with the short-term adaptation? Maybe let's start again with Anne.
Thank you for that. So in the longer term, I think students have a right to expect a much more curated experience. And I'll be honest, I think that the fall will be in some ways more challenging than the spring was, partly because we'll be offering a hybrid. So we're trying to offer both in-person instruction and remote instruction for those who can't be in the classroom, either international students or students who don't feel comfortable being face-to-face. And there's a lot that one can do, which is what we've learned. For example, we're investing in 4 quote-unquote virtual classrooms. So a step beyond Zoom, where the professor faces screens of students, and when the professor talks, the screens talk back to him. So really quite a different kind of a studio experience, which we believe will elevate the remote experience for those classes that are remote. We're also investing more deeply in what we call asynchronous content, which is content that has been pre-prepared, possibly in a studio, with very small snippets of more deeply prepared scripted information. And then of course there's the big challenge, which we didn't talk about, which is engaging students and creating a sense of community, which is a big challenge and which is really, really important in an MBA experience. And one way to do that, for example, which has been mentioned, is small group settings. So one of the ironies of remote education is that even though you can have a class of 2,500 students, it becomes increasingly clear that the most effective students are small settings with small groups of students. And so we have to find a way to balance the fact that we no longer have a capacity constraint with a way to really engage students.
So Jeff, reflections both on the technological, the pedagogical as it were, but perhaps also on, for example, the nature of the courses and the curriculum. Any evolutions there for you at Marshall?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd underscore what Anne just said. I think the balance between really high quality asynchronous lecture-like material with curated small group interactive applied problem solving, that's where we want to go. The old industrial scale model where a finance professor taught back-to-back sections of exactly the same material just doesn't make any sense, right? Why did we do it? We did it because the classrooms didn't allow that professor to talk to all the students at once. So let's create some efficiencies in lecture-like material and then take the surplus and invest it in really high quality small group interactive applied. So I think pedagogically that's the right way to go. The other thing that I think is an incredible opportunity for us right now is to show just how relevant business education is in a very up-to-date sense. So at Marshall, we're going to announce today, so maybe this is a scoop, 2 new classes for the fall. One is in essence a future of capitalism class, how are we going to deal with all of the the post-Piketty kind of stuff about inequality, but now in an environment where it looks like globalization is going to be reversed. What does that really look like? I think all students, not only in business schools, but throughout higher education would be interested in that. The second one, I think that's a unique opportunity for business schools is to update what leadership means, because we now have to think about leadership under uncertainty, leadership in crises, leadership where ESG means so much more than it did before. So we're going to launch today both a future of capitalism and a future of leadership class. And I think meeting the market and showing our students that we're not just dusting off stuff that's been sitting in the curriculum for 25 years. we owe it to the students to do that, but I think it's going to make it more interesting for everybody. So, I'm looking forward, for example, to being a TA in those classes, because I want to talk with small groups of students about how they're experiencing their world and how we can help them make a positive contribution to it.
Mm-hmm. Eva, how does that resonate at St. Gallen?
So I think I'd like to think about it in maybe 4 steps. So the first step is the baby steps that we're making right now, and that's really about building in digital resilience. It's a term that was coined already in the first webinar, Andrew. And that's really about getting ready, so having the technological setup to be ready at any point to switch between offline, online class, or to get a sort of a seamless transition between, or interface between, roomies and zoomies, as one of your speakers in the first webinar termed them. So that's really about having digital resilience. That's something that's a completely new concept to us, something that we just never thought about. Now it's just a must. We must be digitally resilient. Then thinking a little bit longer terms, in terms of the next academic cycle, how does all this help us actually to redesign our courses in order to make them actually more effective in terms of teaching and learning? So that's about, again, as Anne and Jeff already said, it's about building digital assets, so pre-recording some of the content. And as we do that, we start to redesign courses in terms of what really makes sense in the classroom and what makes sense outside of the classroom. And even more, I think it really forces faculty to think very, very specifically. If I needed an hour for a lecture before, does that translate to an hour of video pre-recording, or do I actually have to really think again and understand what's really critical to communicate, and how can I condense my message to the students? So that's a very valuable exercise for any faculty to go through. And then thinking, let's say, maybe into the future of 3 years, I think many of us, many MBA programs will be asking ourselves, what can we actually take as a whole substitution of a classroom course? How can we create fully standalone online courses? And of course, there we will be struggling in terms of, if we are large, if we have a global brand and a huge marketing capability, we can reach a bigger audience, and that makes sense. If we are small, like St. Gallen is, very much focused on the residential boutique experience, then probably we'll be a little bit less ambitious, and we'll be thinking about a sort of overall digital experience. I think the IE Business School used a very nice term for this, liquid learning. How do we seamlessly move between online and offline? And then actually thinking even longer term. So now let's think, maybe 10, 20 years even into the future. All this technological revolution, us learning how to make the best use of new digital tools, what does this really mean? So thinking into the future, does that actually mean that some of us will be competing not just on employment stats and not just on faculty, who's got the best famous faculty on board, but are we actually going to be able to compete on digital experience alone? So if I'm a school that's extremely tech savvy, maybe even I form a partnership with a tech company, am I going to, create an experience that students will crave? Because let's face it, this generation of students is used to things like Uber, right? I mean, I recently downloaded the application for Revolut, the bank, and I could not believe before I did it that it takes 9 seconds to open a bank account. Well, it actually is that fast. It's 9 seconds. It's seamless. It's a beautiful digital experience. And I'm thinking, well, can this be something that we can learn from as MBA programs? Can our applications, take 9 seconds to complete? And can this be called at some point in the future a digital experience, and can be actually our USP?
Thanks. And there was a clarification on digital resilience, but there you essentially meant the ability to switch on and offline depending on, for example, the progression of the pandemic and different demands. Yeah. Francois, tell us a little bit your experiences now. What will be different in the LBS offerings that now are beginning for the autumn?
So I think the difference has started actually, and it's all about how we come together as a community. And what I mean by starting is we've been talking, I think all of us, about our experience being more than just a degree, but being a lifelong learning journey. And what we decided to do, because of the ability to reach people online without having them come to London, is as soon as students were admitted, we started including them in our community. And our faculty did that, reaching out and offering experiences for the admitted students, but our students did it as well. And to me, this is something I like a lot about what's happening today, is the reinforcement of the value of the community. Our students organized events for admitted students to give them the sense of what it means to be a student at LBS. And that certainly helped us recruit. And what I like, it helped us recruit people who know why they are coming to the school. So I think that that's the first change within this concept of the community remaining real, is the idea that the journey started before they showed up. It started as soon as they were admitted. And of course, the journey continues upon graduation, because as some of our students, we were not able to give them the full experience they had been hoping for because of the lockdown. And so we committed to these students who just graduated, and that we would be offering more experience to them in the coming year, 2, 3 years. And so we'll see them back. And then the real challenge that I like for us all is, how do we design, by the time we can do it, face-to-face experiences that give them access to the essence of those experiences that they missed, without necessarily having it to be a class, but what is it that it means to come together and again, engage with and develop that sense of community. And what I've noticed there, actually, with regard to the technology is, and maybe it's my hat to Zoom for figuring out where to position the technology out of all the technology platform available for us to learning, is that Zoom has figured out a way, at least from what I hear from our students and faculty, to be just enough for the faculty to shine and for the faculty to help the quality and the diversity of students to be a real contributor to the experience of everyone, right? It seems to be just enough for that community to remain relevant to the educational experience. And I think in this world, I don't know if it's physical or if it's digital, but what I know is that it remains about the quality of the community we assemble as schools, and how is it we give them a journey. And now the great thing is geography is no longer a barrier, and therefore we can break timing element of the journey and make it truly lifelong, much faster than maybe we ever thought we would do.
So one thing that's come up in the questions, turning to these, is around internships, which obviously is a lot more challenging to do, at least physically, and potentially even remote. How are each of you tackling that? Francois, do you want to start off?
So internship, it's been getting our career services to work over time, like I think everyone else at every other school, to provide the full services and enhance our services to our students. My sense of what happens, that actually employers have been very flexible. They know the talent that they are getting whenever they get our students, and they've been accommodating to make sure that talent could be deployed to the services of their organizations. And so we have many students who have been onboarded online, have been working online, and that seems to have worked just fine. I think it says something about the relationship that I suppose we all have with our employers, that they know the cost of interrupting the pipeline of talent into the organization from our schools, and so they just kept up and adjusted to the new world.
Ava, any modifications you've had to make? Has it been more challenging to arrange internships for students this year?
It has. It has been challenging, perhaps, for our program because of the timing of just as our students go into corporate projects, as we call them, the crisis hit. But in the end, there were corporate projects did happen. Employers were willing to move on in a remote format, and perhaps a little funny story is that the problem didn't come from a commissioning line manager. Sometimes the problem came from HR staff who said, we only have a physical onboarding process in place. So you can do the project remotely, but you need to come to the office to be onboarded. So, but yes, I think when it comes to it, things are possible, and corporate projects can move online as well.
So Jeff, let's talk by all means about internships, but also I see there's a question here around the post-graduation, or the build up to graduation, as it were, in career services. So how are you tackling both the engagement for projects during, but also the prospect for employment in a much tougher market post-graduating?
I think everybody knows, we all know the importance of career services. We all know the importance of careers to our students. My sense of the challenge is I like the way Francois talked about the sort of seamless integration over time of an educational experience. So, you know, I think we just have lots of opportunities now to expand interactions that students can have with potential employers. You know, if you think about experiential learning, the things that work best for students are things that are real. They happen in real time, they happen with real companies, and they potentially have real impact. So, you know, in a data-driven world, for example, you can have lots of students working pro bono for companies during the academic year and adding real value to them and getting to know those companies even before an internship and before full-time employment. So I think I think the careers side of what we do is obviously critical to everybody. But we can take an expanded view of it. And let me go, so I went back earlier in the educational experience, let me go post-education. I think Francois is exactly right that the value proposition of business schools is a lifelong learning one. So we've tended to think about the lifelong value in terms of membership in a club, right? You're now part of a club for the rest of your life because you're an alum, and that's true. But we can now use technology to keep adding value to students. The world is changing all the time. And I think part of our core value proposition to students is that we'll be there for them. And technology just makes that easier. So, you know, degrees are foundational. I think we all agree with that. And that'll continue to be true. But lifelong learning is a reality. Everyone's going to change jobs, careers, who knows what the future is going to look like. And I think all leading business schools are going to have to be able to say to their students in a credible way, we're going to be there with you for the rest of your lives.
But it's an interesting question, Jeff. So, I mean, if the digital approach is becoming the new normal, and if actually, as you say, some of these experiences with virtual internships and so on actually can add distinctive and fresh skill sets, do you think we could actually get to a point where there's actually a greater attraction to employers now of students who've gone through the digital learning experience or the digital internship? It's actually identifying new skill sets that'll be more relevant and important and might actually give them an edge in recruitment.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. And allow me to go personal for a second. My daughter has just graduated and has just begun employment, right? July 1 employment. And, you know, part of her employment was going to be, the core part was training, spending a month of training in essence. Training was partly about skills, but it was also about becoming embedded in the organization. And, you know, if you can't hang out in the coffee and tea room with the people you're training with, how do you replicate that in an online experience? That's a challenge for the person doing the training. But I think it's also an incredibly important skill set for students. You know, I think we all find it just a little weird to have our first interaction with somebody on a screen. But that's going to become a reality. And how do we, so I think we're thinking about new versions of leadership. I already mentioned that. But I think one new version of leadership is how do you build teams in a virtual world where you've never seen anybody, right? Employers need to do that because they need to transition people to their organizations. But I think it's going to be a really important skill set for students as well. And we can help them do that.
And would you share that view and tell us a little bit about what your experiences have been, again, with both the internships during and the careers advice for the kind of post-graduating cohort?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I say that our employers and our students have, in fact, transitioned towards virtual internships. And for the fall, all of our typical corporate recruiters have signed up to do campus recruiting and are expecting to be hiring our students. But of course, all of that will take place virtually. That is continuing. Where I see the challenges is not so much in the recruiting process or in transitioning a face-to-face internship into a virtual one, but simply the economic impacts of this crisis are more felt, I think, for our students than the inability to fulfill the job functions. And that's particularly the case for certain kinds of positions. So For example, if you're interested in going into hospitality or travel, clearly that's an industry that's really been hurt. Also, in terms of the recruiting process in the United States, standard large companies tend to recruit from fall to spring, and then startups tend to hire at the very end of the recruiting season, so March, April, May. So where we've seen as an impact is in startup hires, for example, because those tend to be much later in the hiring season. So really, venture capital is another one that tends to be later in the season, as is real estate. So I'm much more worried about the economic impacts, although we do believe that we certainly have seen that for the fall, employers are still keen to continue to hire our students and are anticipating doing everything virtually.
It's an interesting question. I mean, there you are close to the heart of Silicon Valley. I mean, do you think it's been an easier transition to, basically a largely online experience in where you've got so much tech exposure and experience?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if it's been easier. I think that this pandemic, however horrible that it is, has created some opportunities, and in things like education, right? In things like health technology, there are opportunities and students are taking advantage of those and innovating. And we do see a potential uptick in entrepreneurship and students going into entrepreneurship. What the balance is, I can't predict that.
So there's a couple of questions here from viewers around the important, if sensitive, issue of tuition fees. And despite all that you've said about, all of you four, about the value and the additional skill sets of the digital, of course, there's a widespread perception still, isn't there, perhaps maybe from the legacy of MOOCs and so on, that actually online is cheaper, and that the in-person experience, of course, including the value of networking and informal sessions, is lost, and that therefore there is demand for a reduction in fees. I wonder if that's something that any of you have even contemplated or see some scope for, at least maybe a two-tier system. Francois, do you want to start?
So, I mean, I hear this, and our policy and our strategy was that is a lot more to the degree than what the class is, and we can create great experiences online. And our faculty and our students proved that this was the case, and the alumni contributed. And I want to pick up on something that Jeff mentioned with regard to the difficulty or the issues of creating community online at work. And I don't know to what extent that's happened, but what I've seen is a lot more engagement of our students and of our alumni in our community. And that is something that is very valuable, very unique, that every one of our schools offers, that all our degree programs are onboarding really into an alumni community. Thanks to the technology, I think maybe all of our schools offer opportunities for alumni to participate in elective. They have been able to do that. And when they do that, they add so much richness to the experience of all the students who are there. I think our students actually came up with, we talked about the horrible aspect, not forget about this crisis, but our students use online technology to come together and to support communities in London and wherever they were in the world. So yes, we had some of those demands at LBS, like you saw, more publicized in the US, but I think there was such a strong sense that what we are about is who we are and how we come together, and that it is for life. And therefore, those conversations quickly left us so that we could focus on how do we remain the community that we want to be, students, faculty, and staff. Coming together to support the world with this pandemic and to support one another. And I think through this experience, we got all a real taste of what it would be to spend more of our discretionary time engaging with one another, and how valuable that was. And that just reinforced the value of what it means to be a member of our school's community the same way I'm sure, others have the opportunity to reinforce what it means to be a member of their school's community.
Yeah. So Jeff, Francois mentioned that there's certainly been some pressure, including in the US, from a number of students in leading schools, hasn't there, around fee reductions for the past semester? I mean, are you hearing any pressure around that? What sort of value-added cases are you bringing forward to try and support the existing fees?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is a very sensitive topic, but I think it's one where we've got to be very open with our students. So, the first thing I think we've just got to acknowledge that students are not getting the experience that they thought they were going to get, right? So we can't ignore that. We've got to agree. We've not only got to accept, we've got to agree with them. The second thing that I think we need to do is, where appropriate, where there are specific fees that were related directly to in-person activities, and those in-person activities aren't happening, we should cancel the fees, no question. But then I think, so once you acknowledge, in essence, the hit that students are taking, I think then you move to the positive side. And I couldn't agree more with what Francois said about the value of community, the lifelong value of community, and how much investment it actually takes to realize that from the school side. But I think we should also explain to students and prospective students that actually our cost base hasn't gone down. In some ways, our cost base has gone up. And again, we can talk about that, right? You can show tangible commitments. Francois mentioned MOOCs and the notion that MOOCs were free. The reason MOOCs were free was because they were a Netflix experience. Once the material was in the can, that was it, and anyone could consume it. I think anybody who's now contemplating doing a full-time MBA with a remote component should know that the education they're going to get will look nothing like a 2012 free MOOC, right? Not only are production values infinitely better, but we now know the value and the opportunity to do really important small group applied stuff in an online context. So it is not a MOOC. And by the way, that costs some money for us to do. So let's be really transparent. But I do think it's very important to begin by acknowledging the disappointment that our students feel, that this is not the experience that they thought they were getting or they hoped they would get. And we acknowledge their disappointment and we share their disappointment because it's so frustrating for all of us. Again, just last week in the US, you're ready to go with a whole plan for the fall for schools that have got a lot of international students, and then the administration issues an executive order that might make those plans impossible, right? We're having to react in real time the way everybody else is. And I think the way, the way to lead in uncertain times is to be really open and transparent about what's going on. And if we do that, I think we've just got a better chance of getting buy-in from our students.
Yeah. So Anne, yes, Jeff mentioned obviously the visa situation for international students in the US. Of course, aside from the politics, we've got the continued uncertainties of the pandemic and what sort of measures will be required on or off campus. Are you feeling any pressures in terms of demand, appetite by students perhaps to defer, or even the idea of, shrinking particularly the classic US 2-year MBA into a shorter 1-year or so European style?
Yeah, so I did anticipate those pressures, particularly in March, and was really actually honestly surprised to see that actually right now we're having the opposite problem, which there are many more students who want to enter into our programs, in all of our degree programs, than I ever would have thought. And so, in fact, as we had discussed before, our incoming classes for our evening and weekend and our full-time program are actually the biggest we've ever had in our efforts to accommodate increasing demand. And this really surprised me. I really hadn't expected this increase in demand. I think part of the problem, or part of the reason, is people see this as a very good time to improve their skill set. On a personal level, I have 2 daughters. They've never considered going to school during the summer. Well, this summer they all wanted to do summer school because what else were they going to do? So I am seeing a surprise. I do, however, want to emphasize Jeff's point about what it is that we're offering. We don't want this situation to continue clearly, but I really do want to distinguish remote from on. Really well curated remote experience exactly requires, in fact, more faculty and assistants in the classroom. We're actually adding the number of faculty and assistants that we have to be able to curate the experience. A school like Harvard Business School, for example, has actually told faculty they're going to need to teach more, not less, actually reduce the size of the class. Because to really have a meaningful engagement, you need to do a lot more. We're adding for certain students, we're adding small group experiences to be able to create that sense of community that normally would happen on the campus. So let me stop there.
Okay, and Eva, what about your experience at St. Gallen? Has there been pushback from students, demands for deferral, any sort of needs for a more flexible approach given all the constraints or the uncertainties in the coming months?
Yes, I think we have observed some queries around deferral, and I think that comes from students who actually really do want the in-classroom experience. So perhaps they wish to defer because they don't want to miss out on it. And I think that goes back to the idea that, you know, if you are going to transfer from a classroom to an online communication channel, I think you need to start to, as Anne said, I like the word curate. You really need to curate, or otherwise start to think very carefully about the design of that online communication. So, you know, I know in our world in education, we talk a lot about pedagogy, and, you know, I think it's important. Of course it is. And at the same time, we need to start to think about experience, right? So you're creating a different kind of experience that can be a fantastic substitute for the classroom experience, but we've got to design it. It can't just be sort of last minute ad hoc move across to a new channel. It's got to be absolutely beautifully designed. And this will take time. We're going to have to learn. We're going to have to figure out what's affordable, what's not affordable. But we have to do it. And I think at that point, the question of, you know, I'm not happy this experience will disappear.
So let's stay with you for a second, Eva. I mean, and there's another question here, which is almost structural, I suppose. It's kind of obviously the emergence of alternative, non-traditional providers of business education beyond the business schools. Obviously, we've seen companies, we've seen special trainers, we've seen a growth in a lot of online resources. What do you see, if any, as the big competitive challenge? Are there some new and alternative and potentially cheaper or very different sorts of resources for business education emerging that you see as a competitive threat?
I think we have always operated under some degree of threat, and I think particularly MBA programs have been questioned. We have seen the rise of corporate universities, we have seen the rise of specialist master's programs, and we have seen the rise of edtech platforms from Udemy to Coursera. I think this is always there, and yet still students and more than ever before this year, students are choosing to apply to MBA programs. So we need to be very clear about what value we offer and to whom. And I think coming out of this crisis, it provides us with another opportunity to really rethink that. We need to be very, very specific and articulate in the value that we bring and to whom. So I think the way we think about programs perhaps may change. I mean, and certainly this is the discussion we're having at the MBA program in St. Gallen, is that perhaps if the old paradigm was to start in the middle, so start with designing the program, right? So a group of us decide what the program needs to be, then we push it out into the market. We hope people buy it, and then we hope that they will get placed. And perhaps the new paradigm for us, in order to be very clear and very articulate in the value that we bring, is to think the other way around. So to think about, okay, who is the end user of our product? And actually, maybe the end user is not the student, but the employers of our students. So what exactly do they need from our candidates? Therefore, what do we need to have in the program? And therefore, what kind of candidates we need to recruit into our programs. I think for us, this paradigm is going to shift, and I think it will be useful to do so in order that we maintain our clarity in terms of why MBA programs bring value, and we need to be able to spell it out very clearly.
And what would be, if anything, if it's still not too early to say, that demand, that differential new demand from employers, as you say, if you're starting to think of them more as almost the end user?
Well, I think at some point there was a term, what is the future of the aim of the MBA? What does it look like? Well, one way to answer that question is just to say simply, what is the future of the industry in which your students are placed? So we can look at, for example, our region, Switzerland. We have top 5 industries in which our students are placed. One of them is manufacturing. So just ask yourself, what's happening in the manufacturing world? What transition is this industry going through? And what we know that in order for the Swiss manufacturing to stay competitive, it needs to utilize new technologies like machine learning and AI. It needs to implement increasing robotics. So what does this mean? If we're going to continue to bring value to our students, we need to continue to bring talent, the right talent, to that industry, and therefore we need to put together the whole package that says, our students have the MBA skills, but they also have the right technology skills to be able to serve well those future employers. I think that's a good way of thinking. I think we should stop thinking from inside out. I think we should start to think outside in. And I think we need to make a meaningful and coherent red thread between these 3 parts of our business. And these are pre-MBA program, in MBA program, and post-MBA program. We're very, very good at thinking in silos about this. And I think what we need to get very, very good at is making the connection, and perhaps quite radically, and for me this is important, really quite radically rethink what it is that we do, and does it make sense? Because if we want to survive into the future, we need to make sense of this journey.
Sure. So Anne, again, as we've said, you're in the heart of Silicon Valley. There's a lot of ed tech organizations. Coursera has been mentioned amongst others. Do you see, even despite the sustained demand that you've got for your master's programs, do you see any alternative competitive threats, at least for some parts of that appetite for business education? For Anne.
I mean, well, generally speaking, as we were talking about, we do, globally, there's a very large increase in demand for business education. It's just, as we've discussed, it's taking different formats. For us, what we're seeing, for example, is an increasing demand for evening and weekend programs where individuals can stay in their tech jobs and do the MBA. So that the demand for that, applications for that program this year went up 50%. But I love Eva's kind of switch from looking from the outside in. And in fact, this year, since I'm a new dean, I embarked on a review of the core curriculum. And the first thing we did is we sent out surveys to all our major employers, most of whom are in fact in Silicon Valley. And all the survey responses that came back from the employers said that looking towards the future, there are 2 different demands, opposite in nature, that they want to see our students be better prepared for. One is on the quant side, increasing demand for really hardcore business analytical skills, the ability to engage in digital transformation, the ability to understand AI and be leaders in this without necessarily being the ones who are doing the programming and the coding. So on the one hand, increasing demand for tech. On the other hand, what we're also seeing is an increased demand for what we think of as soft skills, the ability to communicate, the ability to lead diverse teams. California's high schools are 50% Latinx. The ability to have emotional intelligence. So we put all that together, and our new core curriculum that we'll be introducing next fall in 2021 will double the amount of data analytics that we offer. But we're also going to be offering, and I think it could be the first business school that I know, we'll be offering a required course on how do you lead diverse teams? How do you do that effectively in responding to recent demand? The other thing we're doing to respond to what we see as increasingly technical demands in Silicon Valley is we're offering a lot more opportunities for dual degrees. This year we launched a dual degree where you can get a master's in engineering and an MBA concurrently within 2 years. We have one of the best engineering schools in the world. So this is fulfilling the need. The other area we haven't talked about at all in this call is healthcare. Healthcare accounts for 17% of US GDP. Our most popular joint degree program is a master's in public health in the MBA program. So what we're doing is we're combining deep knowledge, which is increasingly necessary through our joint degree programs at Berkeley, with our revised core curriculum. And we think that's going to offer a winning combination to students.
Yeah, so Jeff, I mean, both coming on to Anne's points about particular specialisms and areas of growth, and also tackling that question of competition from non-traditional providers. Any thoughts on how you're pushing back against that?
Yeah, so I think Anne's exactly right that the new economy needs both more technical skills and more sophisticated soft skills. And I think it's always demeaning to call them soft versus hard skills, because they're at least as important. And I agree with you, Anne, and I congratulate you on a leading diversity class being part of the core, because that's going to be the reality for everybody in the world. But I think back to this question of how universities compete with, for example, corporate universities or corporate trainers. Yes, we've got to be customer centric in the way that everybody's been talking about, but I also think we've got to reflect on what our core assets are, our competitive advantage. And the competitive advantage that we all have is tenured professors who've spent their entire careers becoming deep knowledge experts. The challenge for us all is to deliver on the proposition that there is no rigor relevance trade-off. We can be incredibly rigorous about things that are really relevant to our students. And that's just not something that an accounting firm or a consulting firm can offer. So we're spending a lot of resources on deep knowledge expertise, deep content expertise, and we've got to ensure that that's an advantage. And I think the way to ensure it's an advantage is to put a little more pressure on our faculty to be more relevant, right? I mean, I'm a political scientist. I migrated to business schools. Why am I interested in business schools? It's because business schools are the parts of universities that are the most engaged with the outside world. And, sometimes our professors, we hire professors who are head down academics because, they went through PhD programs. We all did that. That expertise is great, but we have to show everybody that it's really relevant too, and the kind of expertise that you get from people with 20 years experience in working in an area is just different than a consulting company or an ed tech can offer. And I really think, again, we've got to be honest about that. We make an enormous investment in faculty, and our investment in faculty has to pay off by ensuring that there's no rigor relevance trade-off. I just think that's at the absolute core of what we do.
Francois, you've talked about strong demand as well, but do you see some parallel different sorts of providers starting to eat into your market a bit?
I think I'll build on what we just heard, that it'll be very difficult for our competition to assemble the type of faculty that we have. And there, we are fortunate at London Business School that we are a school on our own, an independent school. And so the faculty has always understood that you couldn't bring people who are just experts without being relevant, because there's no one to back us. And it is through the impact that our faculty has directly into the world or through the training that they provide, that we actually bring the resources to fund the educational experience that we offer to the students. And so we have a faculty that has promoted each other and selected each other on that element of deep expertise and impact. In addition, being in London, we have access to a tremendous pool of adjunct faculty and guest lecturers who help complement the faculty, and then the staff that comes and join our school, together with, I'll go back to the quality and the diversity of the students that we assemble. And I think this is where it's difficult for competition and for startups to really recreate that experience of a community of experts surrounded with the students and the staff that together create the experience that is at the heart of what we deliver. And I think I want to build up also on what was said about a fundamental difference between us universities and other providers is, who do we work for? And then if you ask yourself now, what is a non-tradable asset that we have, or what is the most long-lived asset? Yes, we do have long tenure contracts with our faculty, but we actually have a lifelong contract with our alums. And they are the ones who define who we are, and they are the ones from whom we work, and they are the ones whom we serve. And if there's something we've learned thanks to the pandemic, is that we could be so much more relevant to them than we have ever been before, thanks to the technology. And so there I see a real bright future for organizations like ours that have this deep commitment to their alumni built into their organizational structure. Because now we can really leverage the faculty, the staff, and the students that we have to really come together, so that what we offer is really is a fostering of an engaged community that's on a lifelong learning journey together. And that is something we are uniquely positioned to offer.
Just one more thing, Francois. Jeff mentioned the issues of Piketty and sort of future of capitalism, and there's a question here also about one issue we haven't really discussed is social responsibility and sustainability related issues. Is that also an important and necessary part of the curriculum going forward?
And we also have not spoken at all about Black Lives Matter, which has been a really important movement associated with the pandemic, and I think a real eye-opener that has brought to the fore like never before the painful fact that some people are always on the losing side of society. And I think we do have a responsibility, the school that we have, in having conversations with our community and with our students about the fact that they do graduate into the elite of society and what is the responsibility that comes with that. But I think all of us, I'm sure, are doing a lot of efforts, in large part actually thanks to alumni or the foundations, to increase the diversity of our classes. And I think we always have to keep this in mind when we talk about diversity and inclusion. But yes, that we can have classes on that, and we should, and we do. But it's also about the best training that we give is in what the people we assemble, and what is the diversity of the group of people who come together on our campus. And how is it that we help them to not just create a safe space, common denominator where no one hurts one another, but actually create a space where ideas connect and collide. And they can learn from one another, and then when they come out, they can be better leaders for the world, for everyone in the world. And that is something that the pandemic and Black Lives Matter has reminded us and brought to the fore, that if anything, we have a heightened responsibility to expend more resources, to expand the diversity of our classes, and to expand the impact that we have. Mindful that we have the chance of attracting and training people who will graduate into the elite of society.
And you talked about diversity leadership as being a priority, so that touches somewhat on Francois' point. What about the issue of sustainability? Do you think there's a risk of, in the new post-COVID world, some of that priority being pushed to one side in the search for renewed growth?
Yes, it's interesting because when I came in a year and a half ago, I encapsulated my platform with 3 words. Innovation, so innovation, entrepreneurship. The second one was inclusion and diversity and inclusion. And then the third one actually is sustainability. And although the pandemic and the terrible scourge associated with it has led us to move towards remote learning and make investments in these virtual classrooms, and we'll be likely launching an evening and weekend cohort that has that is remote in the future. That's one change. But my long-term priorities still remain associated with sustainability, inclusion, and innovation, which of course we're at the heart of Silicon Valley, so it makes a lot of sense. In terms of sustainability, one of the things I did in my first year, apart from the core curriculum reform, is we just launched a sustainability concentration. At Haas, we call them certificates. We have, and so that was something that actually came from the outside in, to use Eva's expression. A lot of interest. California is in fact a leader in sustainability. And in fact, the only person that I am hiring this year is an executive director for sustainability programs, because I'm working with the College of Natural Resources, where I was actually once a professor, and which is the best group in the United States for doing work in sustainability. We're trying to launch a joint program, and that's going to be, after having revamped our entrepreneurship group and created an entrepreneurship group last year, moving forward, I'm really focusing on sustainability.
Sure. Well, we're almost out of time, but I think, Jeff, did you want to come back in on the question of international students very briefly?
Yeah, let me just say, as somebody who came to the United States for higher education and changed my life, the notion that the US is turning its back on the world is one that, at a personal level, I find so disappointing. I really think that even if we enter an era of de-globalization, and I think that's likely, institutions of higher education, probably led by business schools, really have to fly against that trend. And Winston Churchill seems to have had quotes on everything, but the quote that's inspiring me at the moment, it goes something like, if you want a kite to soar, fly into the wind. And that's how I feel about the international role of business schools right now in the United States. There's a lot of pressure going in the opposite direction, but maybe we can fly the kite even higher as a result. And I'm certainly, personally and institutionally, I couldn't be more committed to anything than that.
Well, thanks. I mean, a great challenge and statement of engagement and commitment there. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I think I'd really like to thank all of our great participants from Marshall now, Berkeley, St. Gallen and London Business School for great contributions. Thank you all for tuning in. Do spread the word and encourage others to watch this and engage with us for future events and content. Thank you all so much for a great event, and keep well and goodbye.